We're going to do a review in Likutei Sichos in Chelek Yud Tes, volume 19. This is the biurim that the Rebbe gave in his father's ha'ores on the Tanya, on the Igeres Hateshuuva. There's going to be 5 prokim, 5 sichos in the Igeres Hateshuuva. In this Likutei Sichos, they say in the note over here that the biurim and Likutei Levi Yitzchak on Igeres Hateshuuva were said by the Rebbe in various different occasions. It continued from Chof Menachemov, of course, is the yahrzeit of the Rebbe's father, Agon Rebbe Levi Yitzchak, in the year Tafshin Nun until Yom Kippur, Tafshin Nun Aleph. So that period from Chof of until Yom Kippur of the following year. And the same thing is in Chof Menachemov, Tafshin Nun Aleph till Shabbos Parshas Shoftim. That's all the ways not until a few weeks from Chof Menachemov to Shabbos Tafshin Nun Aleph to Nosei, and they were all printed together in Lashon Kodesh, the Likutei Sichos biurim and Likutei Levi Yitzchak on Igeres Hateshuuva. So here there are 5 biurim that the Rebbe is standing on, and in this Sicha the Rebbe will take notes that his father made, and the Rebbe will ask why why his father explains it this, why he doesn't answer even more pertinent question. And there's going to be a lot of details in the Igeres Hateshuuva, a lot of specific details why he mentions certain things and doesn't mention certain things. The Rebbe will explain that along, and the Rebbe's point is that because of the restrictions that the Rebbe's father, Rebbe Levi Yitzchak, had in the lack of, also the fact that ink and paper was scarce, so he had to put a lot of things in a way of a hint. But if you put yourself to what he is saying, you can learn not only those matters that he directly addresses, those points, but rather get an explanation in the entire Tanya, the Igeres Hateshuuva, more than just that little piece that the Rebbe's father is addressing. Let's look inside. So, first, this was given over on the 20th day of Av, which is the yahrzeit. So the Rebbe first makes the connection from the 20th day of Av to Igeres Hateshuuva specifically. Of course, the month of Elul is the month of Tshuva. And the Rebbe ties that's connected to Igeres Hateshuuva, that Chof Av is already associated with Rosh Chodesh Elul, and as the Rebbe also the Ha'ores brings down, that it's 40 days before Rosh Hashanah, and Rosh Chodesh Elul was 40 days before Yom Kippur. It's all connected to the idea of Teshuvah, as the Rebbe explained. Well, let's go look inside now, and we'll go step by step. Aleph, Igeres Hateshuuva, Aleph. The Kviyas von Esrim B'Av, the setup, the day of Esrim B'Av, which Rebbe points out again in the star over here, is mentioned in the Gemara on the day of the Korban Eitzim of Bnei Pachas Moav ben Yehuda. The Rebbe explained this elsewhere, but we find the day of Esrim B'Av in the Gemara, which is the day that the Rebbe's father's yahrzeit, Agon Rebbe Levi Yitzchak, Yom HaHilula from Tat, which is the Hilula day, the yahrzeit day of his father, the Rebbe's father, Agon HaMekuber Rebbe Levi Yitzchak. Is Bekama Shonim, so in many years In der Woche, was your Shabbos is bei Mevorchim Chodesh Elul. It comes during the week in which the Shabbos that follows, you bench the month of Elul. The Rebbe wants to connect Chof Ov to the month of Elul to get us a tshuva. Because Chof Ov is in many years on the week in which the following Shabbos will be Shabbos Mevorchim Chodesh Elul. And then, if it's connected to Chodesh Elul, the Chodesh was is verbunden mit Tshuva, the month which is connected to Tshuva. The Rebbe basically wishes to teach from the Yortzeit of Chof Ov, teach his father's writings, notes on the Igeres Hateshuuva, and the Rebbe associates that to Chof Ov, the Yortzeit, which is connected to Elul, which is the idea of Teshuvah, and therefore explain matters of Igeres Teshuvah. That man lernen the erste ha'orah von dem Bal ha'hilula and Igeres Teshuvah. So the Rebbe says, therefore, we will study the first note of the Bal ha'hilula, of whose Yortzeit is the Hilula is in Igeres Teshuvah, or on Igeres Teshuvah. So now, Bichlal, in Igeres Hateshuuva, the Alter Rebbe brings down from the various different sources how many fasts you have to do for a particular sin. Though there is a number of fasts which is connected, that if a person failed in a certain sin, then he must make up. The makeup is by fasting a number of fasts for each sin. And then the issue becomes what happens if a person violates the same sin more than once. How many times does he have to fast one, which would be for all the sins, or for each particular sin he has to fast the number of fasts? In the Igeres Hateshuuva, bring the Alter Rebbe the ideya. In Igeres Hateshuuva, the Alter Rebbe brings the opinion as b'shas einer is bagangen demselben chet vielmal. When a person violated the same sin many times, darfer fasten the mispar hatzoynis, then he needs to fast the number of fasts was is bashtim fardem chet, which is designated for that sin, azoy filmo, so many times as he has sinned. If he sinned several times, so the amount of times, the number of times that he sinned, he has to multiply for each sin the number of fasting. Many times, those many fasts equivalent to the number that he has sinned. And then the Alter Rebbe continues, he doesn't just leave it. And he demonstrates, he gives an example. He says, as for example, so as for example, he brings the sin of Amoitzi Zera Levatola, one who wastes his seed. Was there mispar hatzoymes fardem chet? What is the number of fasting that you have to fast to correct the sin of Moitzi Zera Levatola? Is pay dalet tainiyos, 84 fasting. So 84 fasting for the sin of Moitzi Zera Levatola. And the Alter Rebbe says, is im choto bozeh eser or esrim pa'amim. So if he sinned this sin of Moitzi Zera Levatola 10 or 20 times, al derech mashal by way of example, then he would need to fast to make up 10 or 20 times 84. For each time 84, if he did it 10 or 20 times, he'd have to either do 10 times 84 or 20 times 84. And v'chein la'olam. And so forever. If more, he'd have to do more fasts. That's what it says in the Tanya. Is mevayer der tate in seiner Orisei von Tanya. So the father, my father, explains in his notes on the Tanya. As the Alter Rebbe zog the moshul esrin that the Alter Rebbe uses as an example, he says 10 or 20. Why 10 or 20? So the Rebbe's father explains in the note, Val der pegam dur dem cheit is in chokhmah. Because the blemish that takes place through this sin of Meitzis Zedel of Atola is in the level of chokhmah. And the Rebbe brings down, as it says in the brackets, the Rebbe brings down the brackets, the Erzogt weiter in Igeres Hateshuuva, as the Alter Rebbe states, says later in the Igeres Hateshuuva, as der Cheit is poigem b'moyach, that this sin blemishes in the mind. When he says the word moyach, it means the blemish is a chokhmah. Was mit word b'moyach. When he uses the word in the mind, meinter beikirimoyach chokhmah. Mostly, what he means is the brain of chokhmah. So, the blemish of this sin is in the moyach, in chokhmah. The Riber bringt the dogma eser. That's why he brings as an example 10 or 20, because it's a sin of chokhmah. He uses 10 or 20. Val chokhmah is the ois yud. Chokhmah is the letter Yud from Shem Havaya. You take Yud K, Vav K, the letter Yud represents the level of Chokhmah of Shem Havaya. The word Yud under Ois is verbunden mit die zwei Misporim. The letter Yud is associated, is tied with these two numbers, 10 and 20. Eser Oy Esrim, 10 or 20. Why? Because Yud, the number Yud, the letter Yud itself is Eser, is 10. On Yud bimilu, when you fill, you put Yud Vav Dalet, you write it out. But Treft Esrim, that comes Esrim. The Vav and the Dalet is another 10. So it's either Yud alone, which is 10, and then if it's Yud Vav Dalet, then it's 20. That's what he explains. That's why he says 10 or 20. But the Rebbe wants to know, we're just bringing here an example of this particular sin, which happens to be blemishing the Moich HaChochma, but why would he need to give an example of 10 or 20 times to fit the blemish of Chochma? That man verstehen. Der Inyan was der Alter Rebbe read do. What is the subject? The idea that the Alter Rebbe speaks over here. As man darf lefidei zu fasten. That according to this opinion, the Alter Rebbe is discussing that we need to fast as many times as the number of times that he has sinned. Is doch b'shayches to alle chatoim. That is connected. Any sin that you do, any amount of fasting, you have to fast the number of fasts that you have done. That's what the Alter Rebbe is discussing. This particular sin of one wasting their seed, verdo gebracht blois als Beispiel. This is only brought here as an example. Kigoin hamoitzichulu. As for example, the Alter Rebbe brings this down. Tavos is negeya do. So why is it connect over here? In welchen Ort is spoken, that we need to hint over here where he blemishes, that he blemishes in Chochmah, that does that this particular sin is in Chochma the Yud 10 or 20 was Ved Gebracht Lois al Dugma. But this is just brought as an example. We're not talking here specifically about that sin. That's just to give you an example of a sin. Why do we have to tell you over here Eser, which gets into the detail where that sin blemishes? But the Rebbe says that really the issue is here. It's not why the Alter Rebbe says 10 or 20, specifically a number. The question is, and not another number. But let's say instead of 10, 20, you said 30 or 5. Why say 10, 20? That's not really what the issue is. The issue is that there is no need to say any number at all. You can just say that why does the Alter say, ask for example, 10 or 20? Now just say if you did a sin many times, you have to fast as many times as you did this, as you have done that sin. The shaila is noch starker. The question is even stronger. Der diuk in them was der Alter Rebbe chapt on the soul eser yesrim. This that we have, this specific that the Alter Rebbe mentions a number, he says 10 or 20. So what's the problem with mentioning that? It's not that why 10, 20, why not 30? Our issue is why a number altogether. Is nicht farvos zog dit so und nicht kein anderer. It's not how come he says this number and not another number. Was devil given mokum lemer. If that was the issue, then you could possibly say, but at least you can squeeze and say, as vibald darf geben a gewissen mispor, since he needs to give a number. So which number does he choose? Kleibter ois azam mispor. So the Alter Rebbe chooses such a number, was is merames dem pagam von dem ched, which hints to the blemish of that sin, was it on gebrach ledugma, which he brought as an example. If that was the issue here. Now the shaila, but our question is not why 10, 20 versus another number. The question is, azat sol mesuyim do is bechlal ibrik. It's totally extra to give a number. Even if he would have just said, he needs to fast 40, 84 for each time. Or some language similar to this. Nit brengendik abashtimte mispar would not have brought down a specific number. But euch licht eure Gott nicht gefällt, there would be nothing missing. Why does he need a number altogether? Is tamua, it's surprising. Wie shaykh zu sagen. How could we say, as the Alter Rebbe, yeah, hello? 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 Not a wrong button. Love to say hello to you and wish you a happy and a good new year. I hope to see you in shul. You'll be in shul on Shabbos?
Yes, I should be.
Emitz Hashem. I'll talk to you later. Have a great, great day.
Thanks.
Nothing happens by mistake. Everything is divinely inspired.
Probably, yes.
Sei gesund. Thank you. Thank you for the reminder. Thank you.
Bye.
As der Alter Rebbe soll Moise sein, a Dugma was mit Zad Atzmo darf man sie nicht. A example that on its own you don't need it. As der Alter Rebbe soll Moise sein, a Dugma for the Alter Rebbe to add an example that it's not needed on its own. Bigdei zu merame sein, dem Pegam von Achet Proti, in order to hint the blemish of a specific sin, was brengt gedon nor als dogma, which is brought out as an example. So we're saying that he brings down the level, the number of 10 and 20, just as an example. He's bringing down numbers because he talked about a specific sin and he didn't have to bring down the numbers. Hard to explain. The Rebbe in his explanation later on will explain that actually the number 10 and 20 and the fact that it's hidden have actually strong significance to the subject matter in general, as the Rebbe will explain later on. The Rebbe asks further, Gimel, that Bedoime Lidiu Kanal, similar to the specific question that we're saying, to Livos bring the Alter Rebbe a dogma von a gewissen Mispar. Why does the Alter Rebbe bring an example from a specific number, Eser or Yesrim? That's the question that we've been asking. Is dofer noch adiyu kloli? So there is a more general problem, or general question that we have. My father does not base himself to address the other issue. So why does the Alter Rebbe need to bring an example from a particular sin? Why is it necessary to demonstrate by mentioning a specific sin? When there's no blows, if the Alter Rebbe would have just said, a person who sins one sin, the number of fasts for that sin that a person does repeatedly, and he didn't have to give an example. Without giving as for instance, a certain sin. But alles given verstandig, everything would have been understood. Why give example of sins? Parvosis are massive. Why does the Alter Rebbe, to begin with, have to give a for instance by saying, such as a person who wastes his seeds and then go into it, how many times it does it, and how many fasts? The same subject could have been discussed without giving a example. The Rebbe further will explain how that's important to the whole idea here. Another diuk that the Rebbe makes in the words of the Alter Rebbe. Again, his father doesn't address this. We also have to understand. After the Alter Rebbe says, if he did that sin 10 or 20 times, by way of example, then he would need to fast 10 or 20 times 84. Then he adds and so forever. Why? Again, he gave example 10 is then forever. As if to say, oh, maybe you would think 10 or 20 times enough, and then if you did it 30 times, you wouldn't have. Why? As euch, the Rebbe says, as euch, when even if he had sinned in this more than 20 times, dafer fasten pay dalet seimes fariyet mol, he would still need to fast for each additional, for every time he has to fast 84, for each time that he has sinned. So what the question is, it would seem, why is he coming to tell us? It's obvious. Why would there be a thought to say, you need to fast according to the number that you sin is not bizasin empowerment. That should only apply up till 20 times. And in order to reject this idea, you have to add and so for forever. Why would you think otherwise? So the Rebbe wants to know, why do we need an example? Why does he have to say, for instance, about the sin of Amitzi Zerel of Atola, and why does he have to say later on, after saying 10 and 20, and so forever? Why not? And then the Rebbe points to another point that the Rebbe's father makes a point of in a parenthesis in this note on the Likut Levi Yitzchak and the time. In der Ha'ora Amura von Tatni is Mevayin in Chatzoy Yigul, in the above mentioned note, which is the first note on the Igeres Hateshuuva from my father, from Rebbe's father, he explains in a parenthesis, noch adiyuk in the Igeres Hateshuuva, an additional diuk point, specific in the Igeres Hateshuuva. In selben Perek weiter, sagt der Alter Rebbe, in the same chapter, in the Igeres Hateshuuva, the Alter Rebbe later on says that kol ba'al nefesh chulu, a person with a soul, meaning a person who takes it serious after bringing the two opinions, whether he needs to fast for each time the number of fasts assigned for that sin, or it's sufficient to fast one time for all the sins together. And then their middle ground is to fast 3 times that number, so that would be 3 times 84. The Alter Rebbe says that kol ba'al nefesh, person who is about nefesh, has a soul, meaning he's serious about his Yiddishkeit, his service to Hashem, Yachmir al atzmai, should be stringent upon himself, lahashlim al kol ponim pamachas, to make up, complete, at least once, kol yimei chayev, during his lifetime, during all of his lifetime, mispar hatzoymes, the kol oven v'oven, ma'avonos hachamurim. So the number of fast days for each sin and sin of the serious sins, those sins which are called serious chamurim, shechayav malei misa, al kol ponim, those that you would be liable for death, not only death by Beis Din, but vafilim b'dei shemayim bilvad, to at least once in your lifetime fast for them. As for example, for the sin of wasting one seed, which the number is 84, is paid dalet soimes pamachas mechayev, to fast 84 fast days at least once in your lifetime. So that at least you've fasted 84 times to make up for that particular sin, because the sin of a Zerel of Atola carries with it Misa B'dei Shomayim, and therefore you should at least fast it once during your lifetime. And the Alter Rebbe says you don't have to fast it consecutively or full days. Is a v'yochel l'tchoisom, and you can push it off. And he says to do it v'yisane etc. V'yisane ke'eser tinius al derech moshel b'chodev echad chudu. So to fast such somewhat like 10 fast days in one winter, to do it in one season, one winter, when the days are short and it's easier to fast. So you can fast in the winter 10 fast days. That's what the Alter Rebbe says. Is Mevayir der Tate. So my father explains here too. He says he should fast 10 fast days. Why did he say again the example of 10 fast days? As those was zog do ke'eser tinius. Why does it say like 10 fast days? Is val ke'eser ugam kin yud, because like 10, that's also 10. And that's why he gives an example of 10. Because it blemished the level of Chokhmah, which is the Yud. But here too, we need to understand. Is in them inyan do adi klali yeser. But here too, we have a more general issue, a more general diuk of us the tatish totzich in which my father does not base himself. Tzilivos bring the Alter Rebbe dugma. Why does the Alter Rebbe bring again an example? He brings again the sin of wasting one seed. Why does he at all bring it down? Forget about saying the number like 10 times. Why say 10 fast day? Why did it bring even down? This is an example. Also, we need to understand. The Bald, as the Alter Rebbe's father explained earlier, it says 10 or 20 because the Oish Yud is verbunden nicht nur mit Mispar Eser. It's not only associated with 10, not mit Mispar Esrim, but with the number 20. Canal. Was is the tam beprimis inyonim? So, what is the reason in the inner things? Was by vayisane b'chodev when it comes to fasting in one winter. Bringt nor the minyan, he only brings the idea of the mispar esim, or need the mispar esim. He doesn't bring the number 20, just like we had it before 10 and 20. Meaning, according to Pashtas 10, because it's hard to fast 20 fast, so it's not really a problem in Pshat. But the Pnimis Yonim, how is it over here we're just mentioning 10 without 20? And before we have to have both numbers, side 10 and side 20. I say, so the Rebbe says that his father in the notes was very restricted, and there's a lot of hints there, even though he wasn't able to articulate, write out everything, but you can learn a lot more about the subject itself. Hey, Shengeret filmo benegeya dem tatens haoris of Zoyar und Tanya chulu. Already spoken many times in connection to my father's notes on the Zohar and the Tanya, etc., as mitzat kama timing for various reasons. Oich mitzat dem doichek im papir und tint, also because of the availability in paper and ink that were pressed, that wasn't available. But there's a geschrieben bekitzer nimrats. He wrote it very short. Besas man lernen ze be'iun haroi, when you study it with the proper focus, zet men die durch ze werden bevornt kama shailas. Then you can see that through those notes, many questions are answered. In the erter wo stellt sich, both in the places and where he places himself, ulipamim euch in andere erter, and sometimes also in other places. And that's in addition, noisef to the diukim avachner stellt sich beferish. In addition to those points and questions, the issues on which he clearly places himself, but you can get answers for other ideas, other issues. Unochmer, and furthermore, Afal pi as in Roiv ha'oris, although that in majority of these notes, stelter sich begolui, openly he places himself of the Yukal Lashonis on the specific languages used and similar to this. Zetman over bekama v'kama mehem, but we can see in many and many of these notes, when you properly think about it, how through these notes, it's explained and answered also the general idea of that matter of the subject on which he places himself. Is similar in our case. When he's mevayer, although openly he's placing himself and explaining, blois dem diuk, he's only talking about the issue. Was that Alter Rebbe schreibt the dogma that Alter Rebbe writes the example, Eser oy Esrim, 10 and 20, that's what he's addressing, his father. Und ke'eser taniyos, in the note also the 10 fast day. Werden durch der Haore verantwortet, but through this note are answered noch kama v'kama d'yukim, many other issues that are being answered, other problems are being answered. Also, the issues that the Rebbe brought down in the Sivim Gimel Daled. Why does he have to bring down examples, and why does he bring down 10 in the other place? All these issues, as the Rebbe will explain it later on. Furthermore, durch der Haore, through this note, also the general idea of this subject becomes clear, becomes explained through his note. We can read the Tam Farvos Lifideya Achas. Why, according to one opinion, Tzorich Lis Anis Misparat Soimis Loisichet Pamim Rabbis Kifia Misparashachot. Quoting the Alter Rebbe says, according to one opinion that we were been talking about, you have to fast the number of fasts for that particular sin in the amount times how many times you did the sin. And also the reason for Avos Kol Bal Nefesh Yachmer Alatzmei. The Rebbe brings down a person who is a Bal Nefesh, who is serious, should be stringent upon himself, lahashlim al kolponim pamachas chulu, at least once to complete the number of fasts, chulu kedel kamon, as the Alter Rebbe will explain later on. Both. So the Rebbe brings down, first of all, in a general way, what happens when a person violates a sin. There is the general violation of not listening to Hashem, which is a general blemish. And then you have to fix that. And the blemish in a particular area, in a particular limb, which is associated with that Avera, and how each particular limb has a connection and weakens all the other parts of the body. These are going to be the three. The Rebbe is going to connect that to the three opinions, whether you fast once for as many times you did that Avera. You only have to fast that number once for all Averas you did in your life. Whether you have to do it for everyone, or number three, whether you do it to do it 3 times for all Averas, not for each one separately, but do it 3 times, as the Rebbe will bring down. Both. We can say the explanation all the above. In dem pagam was werd durch achet, the blemish that takes place through a sin. And we talk about a blemish, so then we know how to fix it. To be meila oich in dem tikkun of them, and therefore also how to fix it. Teshuva, which is teshuva. Zayin do bechlal drei inyonim. Generally speaking, there are 3 aspects to it. The blemish that takes place through a sin. Aleph, number 1. The bald as mit jeden chet is men over. Oifun tzivui fu melech malchei hamlochim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Any sin, it doesn't matter. But if you sin, you are transgressing the command of the king, the one who kings, Hashem. Was das is the nekuda aklolis under tzad hashove von alavedas. This is the central point and the common denominator of all avedas, that you are violating the command of the king. You're not listening to the king. So that aspect is mendur yeder avera. So any avera you do, not only when you're doing something negative, but also not doing positive, you are not listening to Hashem. You take off of yourself the yoke of the heavenly kingdom, and you become a Rasha. That's a general, central thing. How do we fix that? Under tikkun of them is, how is the correction for that aspect that you violated and you went against the command and you took off the yoke of the heavenly kingdom? How do you fix that? It's that the sinner should let go of his sin. He should make a decision in his heart that he won't do it anymore. That's how you fix it. You violate it and you say, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do it again. Using the Loshen Admor Hazokin, the B'Loshen Admor Hazokin, to use the language of the Alter Rebbe, that he should make up in his heart with a complete heart, fully in his heart. The Bal Yoshev Oidli Kisla, he will no longer ever go back to his foolishness, Limroid b'Malchusa Yisbarich, to rebel in his blessed kingdom. He will not again violate the command of the king, God forbid. That's the correction. Through this decision and accepting for the future, but das is der Mahus from Tshuva, which is the essence of Tshuva, to make a decision not to do it again. Werter gleich ois Russia, so he immediately becomes no more Russia. Und das can sein afilu beriga choda. That can be even in one instance. With the psak din in Gemara Poskim, as the ruling in the Gemara and the codifiers, as durch ein hirur tshuva, that you have one thought of tshuva, vert a Rasha gomer a tzadik gomer. A complete Rasha turns into a complete tzaddik. One thought. That's the pagam, the general pagam for violating Hashem. That can be done, accomplished very quickly, instantly, by that level of teshuvah. And then there's 2 other aspects that take place. Base. Hayois v'ditmimis und shleimus von der Evore HaNefesh is totally in the mitzvahs. It is. The fact is that the limbs of the soul, the evorim that the soul has, hinges on the mitzvahs. A healthy limb, a healthy soul, has all limbs healthy. But when you violate a mitzvah, you are impacting a very specific limb of the soul. Is durchem bittel von a mitzvahs essa. When you waste and you don't do a positive mitzvah that you should be doing, oder durch over sein of a mitzvahs los essa, or by violating a prohibition, verta pegam und chisoren in them ever proti, then there is a blemish and there is a lacking in that particular limb, was shaykh to their mitzvah protis. So you bring about a blemish and a lacking in that limb which relates, which is connected to this specific mitzvah, and which you violated. So the violation of that specific mitzvah causes a blemish in that specific limb. And in order to fix, to correct that specific blemish, darf man ton die Tikkun Tshuva was seinen Shaykh zu der Aveda Protis. Then you got to do the corrections of Teshuva as they are associated to that particular Aveda to fix that limb in that Aveda. That's the specific as it is affects a specific limb. Koilel oich the misparat seimes, that includes also the number, the amount of fasting was einen bestimmt for that Aveda Protis that have been set up for that specific Aveda in order to fix that particular limb damage that was caused by this Aveda. And yet there is a third level, Gimel. Every limb is connected to the other limbs as well. Hayois Gimel, as a kilkul in an Ever Proti, macht euch am ein kilkul zeh. A kilkul in a certain makes a similar to this kilkul in all evarim, in all limbs. Hoilt yeder aveda pagam, because the interrelationship of the limbs, so each aveda also impacts a blemish in alle koiches and evorim for mention, in all the powers and all the limbs of the person. The person gets impacted. And this we can learn because the Mekol Shekei, this is as a foretory, of course, from the fact from them was jeder Peula hat a Wirkung auf dem Klolus ha'olam shemechutz la'adam, that every act has an impact in the world in general, which is outside of the person. So for sure, within the person himself, the other limbs are impacted by the pegam, by the blemish of that particular limb from that particular Aveda. So how do we fix that? The far is Medarka Tshuva. That's why part of the ways of Tshuva is nit nor umisrachik ben adover shachoto. Not only to further yourself from this item that you have done, that is sin chulu, nor euch mishane ma'asav kulon letoiva ulederech yishara. You have to change all of your actions for the good and to the right way, because you impacted everything. So you have the general violations, which is fixed through tshuva instantly. You have this specific limb violation, which requires that specific tshuva to fix that blemish. And then you also have it blemishing all the rest of the limbs, in which you need to have it generally changing your actions in a general way. So the Rebbe now is going to take these three levels that we talked about, the general tshuva for the pagam, and the specific tshuva for that particular avera, the number of fasts, and then you have how it impacts the other avorim. The Rebbe is going to say now that within the blemish of each of the limbs itself, which we said that you impact a certain limb, we have within it also these three levels of it. And the Rebbe wants to explain why we have the different opinions about how many times you have to fast for each of the blemishes, whether once is enough, one time the number, you need for each time that number, or 3 times that number. Because the Rebbe explains within the blemish itself is how you blemish the limb itself. One time is enough to fix that. There is the way the other parts are included. Over there, it's 3 times. And your impact that you have on the other limbs, over there it happens every time, and that's the other opinion, as the Rebbe will explain. Let's look inside. Zay, Torah is the klolus supratus nebra. Torah speaks in general and also in specifically. So just like we said there is 3 parts, we can find within part number 2, what we called before, the middle part, there's also 3 parts. Is in jeden einem von die 3 inyonim shebesiv vav, in each one of these 3 aspects of siv vav, whether we talked about violating just the will of Hashem, point 1. Point 2 is violating that specific blemish in the soul which is associated with that avera, and then talking about how he impacts the other limbs. So within each one of themselves, there's also 3 parts. Is in jeden einer von die 3 inyonim shebesiv vav. In each one of these 3 aspects, 3 vav, seine Veran beprotius dugmas de alle 3 inyonim. So specifically, there is similar to these 3 matters. We're not going to talk about point number 1, the general. We're not going to talk about point number 3. We're going to talk about point number 2. This blemish that the blemish is that particular limb that you have to fix it by a certain amount of fast days. As it relates to our matter, der mispar hat soimes was is bestimmt, the number of fast days that has been set up for averes proteus for specific sins, was is verbunden mit dem proteus dicum pekam, which is associated, it's tied to the specific blemish, which is the zweiter inyan delil. This is the second subject matter we discussed. This was the number 2. Seinen in dem pagam gufe faran dugmas de 3 inyonim anal. Is specifically within the blemish of the limb, there is a similar of the 3 above mentioned ideas. You have the blemish itself, the way it impacts the general, how it affects the others, as the Rebbe will explain. Habir b'zeh, explanation. Hayois as alle evorim zainen klulim zeh mizeh. Since all limbs are included one of each other. So something which happens in a limb, and that specific limb isn't just separated for that limb, but all limbs are included. So therefore it turns out, as in jeden ever seinen verandra inyonim, that in each limb we have 3 aspects. Aleph zayin etzemahus. Now, number 1 is the essence of what that aver is themselves, that particular aver. Beis, number 2, the is koilel in zir al andere vorim, how he includes within himself the other limbs as they are included in that aver. And 3, gimel ve'gefinzich in alle vorim, how he, this limb finds himself in the other Eivar. Therefore is verstandig, from this is understood as der Pagam von dem Eivar Proti, that the blemish of this particular specific limb was ver durch der Aveda Protis, that takes place, that blemish through this particular Aveda, which impacts specifically that limb, is benegei ale drei yormanal. It is touches all three aspects of the limb essence of the limb that how he includes himself, the other limbs, and how it extends into the other limbs. Yes. So V'yesh Loimar, that was going to give now the three opinions of different fasting, how it's associated to these three aspects. V'yesh Loimar, we can say, as der Begam in them etzem hus von dem Eiver, that blemish in the essence of the limb wird gemacht in ganzen gleich beim ersten Mal von dem Chet. That is totally made by the first time you do this sin, the essence of that limb gets impacted right away fully. As kommt nicht zu in them, it does not add to it an inyan ikri al kaponim, or at least minimally nothing major, nothing main takes place durch ton demselben Chet noch einmal by doing the same sin again. That blemish that is done to the essence of the limb by which you do this sin, that does not increase every time you do the sin. Once you've done it, it's done. Der Pegam in the protim von dem Eiver, but the blemish to the details of the Eiver, which means when you consider the limbs that are included, the Eivorim, haklulim by ukiyetsu, by those limbs that are included in the Eiver, similar, wird nishlam erst beim ton dem Chet dem dritten Mal. That is accomplished when you do it the third time. Doing it three times impacts the limbs that are part of that limb. Wie der Alte Rebbe bringt from Zohar, as the Alte Rebbe brings down from the Zohar, Zimnot Liso is Pashet Ahu Kisma. On the third time, that spot, that blemish, expands Misitra Do from one side to the other side. As by dritten Mol, Nem durch der Fleck, that by the third time, that spot, dem Eiver was yishayich zu dem Chet, that limb that is associated, that sim, durch and durch, through and through, which means it touches all the other limbs as they are associated to this limb. It goes through and through. That happens by doing it three times. Der Pagam was wert in the andere Eivorim. The blemish that takes place in the other limbs, was he does shown beim ersten Mal, that takes place at the very first time he does this sin. Wird aber keinmal nicht werden misitra do lisitra do. It is never going to be from one side to the other. You're not going to do Valdi Averis from the Evorim is a nit over, which means on the third level, that which you blemish as a result of blemishing yourself, and it impacts the other Evorim, that third aspect of it, that which takes place by the first time, but it's never going to be mesitra do lisitra do. It's not going to be totally encompassed like we have it by this sin itself, doing it three times. While the Avedas from the Evorim is an itoiver, because you're not violating those sins that cause a blemish in those particular Evorim. They're just expanding from this Ever. Mistaber loimer, therefore it's logical to say, as every time you do a sin, then it adds an addition. So every time you do the sin, you impact the other Evorim. You're not going to make it through and through like 3 times, like the Evorim that are included in this limb, but the way it impacts the other limbs, it's not going to be. But each time you add more. And that's the explanation. Das ist the beer from the 3 days. It also explains the explanation of the 3 opinions. They're all words of living God, they're all true. What the question is, was wieviel Mal man darf fasten the Misparat Zoymes Farachet? How many times we need to fast? The number of fasting for a sin. If you've done it many times. Fasten for jeden Mal bezunder, whether for each time separate. You have to fast for each time. The Erste day, that's the first opinion. Number of what you do, you have to fast for it. And number 2, the second opinion says genug der mispar soimes ein mol, or you fasted 1 time, that covers all the times that you've sinned. So you'd fast the number of fasts for that sin, and that covers as many times you've done this sin. The zweite day, that's the second opinion. Other men are fasting gimel pamim, or you need to fast 3 times the amount of the prescribed fast days for that sin. You do it 3 times. And that covers as many times that you've done it. If you fasted 3 times the number of the fast prescribed for that sin, which is the achroa mukubelas, that is the decision that has been accepted. So how does that connect to these 3 blemishes? Sulib dem tikun hapagam in dem etzem ahus from dem ever. Because in order to fix the blemish in the essence of that limb itself, is maspik der misparat soimes pamachas, over there it's sufficient, the number of fasting 1 time, because that blemish is 1 time. Nothing is added to the blemish by doing it over and over again. So to fix that limb itself is 1 time. But when you talk about sleep them tikkun pagam in the andere ivorim, to fix the blemish that you cause to the other limbs, each time you cause more blemish. That's the number 3 before. That you need to do for each time. Und zu lieb dem tikkun hapagam in the andere ivorim, and in order to fix the blemish in the other limbs as they are included, this is in kolon dem aver, as they're included in this aver, that man fasting gimel pam, you have to fast 3 times. Because over there it's blemish besitra do l'sitra do by doing it 3 times. We can say that this is also the reason. From that was alpha p, as the Alter Rebbe named on the Achra Mukabelas, that the Alter Rebbe accepts the deciding accepted opinion. Lis amis gimul pa'omim. Is to fast 3 times the number of fasts for each sin, the chaytza of that sin. Von deswegen paskenter, and yet he rules as in the ersten Mal misparat soimes, the first time when you fast the number of fast days, zomen machmer sein mer, you need to be more stringent in the andere zweimal than in the other 2 times. The first time the number sinned, you have to be more strict than the other 2 times for that number of sin. When it gets to the andere zweimal, as far as the other 2 times of the 3 times that you want to fast, that you need to fast, is beis chatzoyi yoim nechshavim lo liyem echad. 2 half days are considered as 1 day. As opposed to the first time you got to fast a full day. Why is that? Well, the pagam in etzem hus von aver, because the blemish in the essence of the aver was ein tikkun is durch mitzvah hatzomes pamachas, who's being fixed by fasting 1 time that number of fast, is chomur yoiser, because that's more serious from them pagam in the avodim aklulim, by then the blemish of the limbs that are included in the neighbor, for which you're fasting 3 times for misitra do l'sitra do. So therefore, was vetnistaken durch fast noch 2 mal. That is fixed through 2 times more. It's not as serious. You can do chatzi yom for that. And that's why this is more strict. And now the Rebbe is going to go back to explain the questions that he asked before. Why does the Alter Rebbe Bichlal have to bring down the example, he said, of Moitzi Zera Levatola wasting the seed to explain how many times you have to fast? We can say this is also of the reasons was bringing the erste day when he brings down the first opinion. That you have to fast according to the number that you have sinned. Is that Alter Rebbe Moisi? The Alter Rebbe asks, as for example, one who wastes the seed. Rebbe explained, Benegeya to Shichvas Zera, as far as the seed in the person, Zok the Rambam states that Kol Sheteitze B'Yoser Haguf Kolo. As it goes out a lot, the body is destroyed. The Koiche Kolo, and his power is destroyed. B'Chayav Ovdim, and his life is lost. Therefore is movement. So from this we understand, as in the Mcheit fun Hoitzoa Zera Levatola, that in this sin, by wasting one's seed, is mer begolui, it's more openly Aleph. Number one, you can see vidercheit poyelt oich in alle evrei haguf, how this particular sin impacts also all other parts, all limbs of the body. Beis, and number two, vidurch yader mol werd gresser der pegam, that each time the blemish is greater. So this is more demonstrated, it's more openly by this sin of Zera Levatola, that you are destroying all of your body. And also that each time, the more you do it, is B'yoser Me'aguf. When the Rebbe is the Alter Rebbe Moisif, that's what he asks you, going on Moitzi Zera Levatola. That's what he brings us as an example, like one who wastes his seed. By bringing this example, it explains by all sins, der Tam von der Deya, that explains the reason of the opinion, amendar fasten al kol pam v'pam, that you have to fast for each fast and fast, because it impacts all the limbs every time more and more, and therefore you need to, when he brings the example, when he brings the opinion that you have to fast for each sin, the amount of fasting. Yud. Rebbe brings down that Eider the Rambam zogt v'chol sheteitze b'yoser haguf kol v'chayev ovdim. Before the Rambam brings down that the more comes out, the body is destroyed and he loses, his life is lost, Izer Magdim, he introduces that Shichva Zera, he koyach haguf v'chayev, that this seed, the Shichva Zera, is the power of the body and its life. Thus haste. That means, as does was Shichva Zera poil toifun guf, why does this Shichva Zera impact the body? Is as a toitzo mesuvov, that is a result, and it's a consequence from them was is der koyach haguf, the fact that it is the power of the body. That's why it impacts the body. V'yesh, so we can say ados was shichva zera he koyach haguf, when we say that the shichva zera is the power of the body, is nit ir etzem mehus. It's not the essence of the body. That's not what we're saying. Those was shichva zera is koyach haguf. When we say that the shichva zera is the power of the body, as sie is koilel euch dem koyach von ganzen Guf, that includes the power of the entire body, that is an inyan noise. That's an added. That's not the body itself, but it's added to it. Ir etzem mehus is a tipa nekuda. The essence of the body is a drop. It's a point. Was his hecher from tzir, which is beyond the shape, beyond the shechasek. And furthermore, the nekuda from the tipas hazera, that point of this drop of the seed is verbunden mit nekudas hanefesh, is tied with the point of the soul, not just with the point of this of the body, but with the soul. With sadem, was ir mehus is a nekuda tipo, was is verbunden mit nekudas hanefesh, and because its essence is a point, a drop, which is connected with the point of the soul, the riber is a koyach. That's why it includes the power for the body. And therefore, the Rebbe says in the Funish Verstandig, we can understand, therefore, the sin of wasting the seed in vain. As der choimer hapagam from them chait, that the seriousness of the blemish of this sin is benegeya to alle drei inyonim anal, as it impacts all the three matter of siv zayin of each of the limbs that it impacts. Mitzad the roifos the tipas hazera is koilel dem koyach haguf, because the drop of the seed includes the power of the body, and it impacts the whole body, is there pegam in andere vorim. So the blemish, as it impacts the other limbs, is in them both, as they are part of this limb, and how they are separate was through them chait, which comes through the sin. This is more serious than in other sins. Mitzad ir etzem mahus, and its essence, the tipa is euch der pegam in etzem mahus from them aver. Then it's also the blemish in the essence of that aver. Was ver durch dem chet, that the blemish that you're doing in the limb itself, that middle point, that S of the aver, that it's more serious than other sins. As that chait is pogim, since this blemishes, this sin blemishes, nit nor in them etzem mahus punan aver proti, not only in the essence of a specific limb, but in the etzem mahus von azayin, but in the essence of the being of such a matter, which is tied to the soul of the nefesh. So basically, you have the seriousness of this sin, because in all three aspects, in the limbs, the way they are included in this limb, in the way it impacts the other limbs outside of the limb. But now the Rebbe says also within the limb itself, it touches not only in the essence of this particular aver, but it touches the essence of the soul, the point of the soul. Yud beis. So based on this, we'll understand was the dogma for that this example for wasting one seed, bring the Alter Rebbe in the Pedig Draimol. The Alter Rebbe brings it down in this chapter 3 times. By the day by the opinion that one needs to correct, he needs to do it as many times. You have to fast the number of times as you have sinned, times whatever the amount of fasts have been determined for that sin, times the times you've sinned. Is there moisif? And he asks, then again, by the achara hamukubelas, when he brings by the deciding accepted, is Lisanis Gimel Pa'omim. When it talks about fasting 3 times, as the accepted do 3 times the number, again is Moisif, he adds the Hainu Reish Nun Beis Soimis, that is 252 fasting for wasting one's seed. That's the second time. By Kol Nefesh, Yachmir, Al Atzvoi, Lahashli, Al Kol Ponim, Pam Achas. And then when he talks about that every person who is serious about Nefesh should be stringent upon himself to complete at least one time, is that Moisiv again he asks you going as for example, for wasting one seed, pay dalet tzoymes pamachas, 84 fast at least once. So he gives it in all these examples. The time of them was sorich lisanes kfi mispar asher choto. The reason why he needs to fast the amount that he has sinned is mitzad deroif, is because of the fact was durchum chet verta pegam euch in the andere ivorim. This is eine b'mekoyma, because that blemishes the other limbs as they are in their place. The tam of lisanis gimel pamim. The reason why we do 3 times is mitzad pegam in the evorim. That is for the blemish in the limbs. V'zeizainen kolul in the mever, as they're included in this limb. Was is shaykh to them chet, which is connected to the sin that he's doing. Und der Tam of lahashlim al kolponim pam achas ganze tzoynes, to make up at least 1 times all, not half days. Nit kein beis tzoyim is mitzad dem choimer from them pagam. That is because of the seriousness of the blemish. Was is in etzem mahusan aver, which is in the essence of the aver itself. Kenal baruch hasivches, as said before in the sivchas at length. On die 3 inyonim werden musbar, and these 3 aspects are explained durch bringen in the 3 erteranal, by bringing in the above 3 places the dogma for noitzo zero vatola of wasting one seed. Warum in der chet seine mudgesh yesad alle 3 inyonim. This sin, it's more emphasized all these 3 matters that the Rebbe explained in the way the essence of the nekuda of the nefesh and the kayach haguf, as it impacts all the other parts of the body, is emphasized in this summit. You'd give them. Based on all the above, will also understand was in der dogma, was the Alter Rebbe bringt about der Deya, that the example the Alter Rebbe brings by the opinion that when he has to fast the number of times that he said it doesn't say you have to fast 84 for each time. Similar. He gives an example, a question the Rebbe asked in the beginning. When you fast many times as you have sinned, then you correct all 3 aspects of that blemish. When you fasted the first time, is memesaken the pagam them etzamus from them aver. Then you fix the blemish in the essence of that aver itself. Durchum fasten noch 2 mal, by fasting additional 2 times, is memesaken euch dem pagam in the vorim aklulim boy. Then you fixing also the blemish in the limbs that are included in that aver. Und durch die andere tanesim, and then when you go beyond 3, noch the erste 3 mal, is when the sakin euch dem pegam in the evorim v'zizane b'mekoymam, you are fixing also the blemish in the limbs as they are in their place. Und the Rebbe is an Alter Rebbe mefaret 3 yifanim. That's what the Rebbe says 3 ways. Eser esrim ul olam. These three ways, 10, 20, and Lo'ilam bring out these three matters before Kidul come on, as the Rebbe will explain. What Eser, Esrim, and then Lo'ilam. So is Mavur in Chassidus, Inyan Milu Oisius. Chassidus, it explains in the filling of the letters. As der Milui from Yeder Ois is nor Kidei Lefarish Lezulose. The fill of every letter, that the spell out of every letter, is in order to articulate it to somebody else. As he brings on this, the example is from Ois Yud, from the letter Yud. As b'machshove, in thought, and also when you write, you can think and you can write. You can just write the letter Yud. When you want to say the Yud in your mouth, to somebody else, then you have to also add the fill, the Oisius Vav Dalet. Yud has the Vav Dalet in it. But still, is Oich der Mili Vav Dalet kolu free in the Moshe Gufa. It's included before also in the letter Yud, but it's not open. When you want to speak it, then you have to say it. Aber Oich sein die kolu in them Ois. But even when it is included in the letter, since it's only in order to articulate it to somebody else, is there nit nechshav mebichinas atzmus el rak davanosov ala atzmus. It's not considered from the level of atzmus, but something added to the atzmus, because it is meant for expression, so it's not in the essence. So according to this, we understand that these three ways, Eser, Esrim, und Lo'ilam, seine verbunden mit die drei Yonim Hanal, are connected with these three aspects. Eser, which is the mispur from Ois Yud Gufa, that's the number of the Yud itself. Was is Kidmus Tipa, that's the image, looks like a drop, is verbunden mit Pegam Bitekune in the Moyach Gufa. That is connected, associated with the blemish and the fixing in the mind itself. Esrim, the mispur from Ois Yud B'Melua. Esrim, which is the number 20, when you fill it in with the Yud Vav and the Dalet, that is associated with Pegam and Tikkun in the Evori Haguf, is the limbs of the body as they are included in the brain. Those times which go beyond 20, with the blemish and the correction in the guf, in the body, oilam cotton, the small world, that's le'olam, into the world, into the rest. Was in the Yisane B'Chodev Aleph, when he says you should fast in one winter, Brekter nor the Mispar Eser, he says only 10. Unit Esrim, it doesn't bring 20. Yisane B'Chodev Echot, in an Eifun, in one winter, in an Eifun, in fasting, pay dollars. Paid out service pamachas, because here we're talking about only fasting at one time. We're not talking about how you impacts the other. We're talking about that aspect which is only once. Paid out service pamachas. Und der Riber is dem Shaykh nor der Mispar Eser. There's only the 10. There's nothing included. We don't have the Eser. We don't have the Olam. This is Mesiches Shabbos Parshas Ekev Tavshin Lamed.